Well, good morning, and thanks for being here. My name is Joseph Crines. I'm the Chief of Police of the Vallejo Police Department. If you would just indulge me for a few moments, I have a statement that I'd like to make for a couple of minutes here and talk about this particular case, but also talk about a variety of incidents that have been occurring in our jurisdiction over a period of time. First of all, on behalf of the City of Vallejo and the Vallejo Police Department, I want you to know that we send out our sympathy to the family of Mr. Romero, that we empathize with the loss of their loved one, that any loss of life is a tragic loss, and that I assure you that our officers are keenly aware of the enormous responsibility that has been given to them in regards to safety issues and the community role that they play each and every day. As always in these types of incidents, I have briefed both the mayor and our city manager. They're being kept apprised as to the status of our ongoing criminal investigation. I'll tell you quite frankly that no police officer wants to be placed in a situation where they're confronted by the choices of the necessity to use lethal force. However, that is the reality of our job. It's important to remember that there is significant trauma that is placed on the individual officers who go through these kinds of events when they're placed in these types of situations. As a chief of police, I'm always concerned about any critical incident wherein our officers are confronted with armed individuals and they're required to utilize lethal force. In any such event, I'm concerned about the safety of the community, the safety of our officers, and the safety of all individuals in any such incident. It's my belief that even one event of this magnitude is too many. However, the unfortunate reality is that our officers are confronted with dangerous situations on a regular basis, and at times they're engaged in violent confrontations. We are unfortunately reminded by the significant dangers that our officers face on a daily basis, and tragically we are again reminded of that danger with the critical wounding of our fellow law enforcement officer, Kenyon Youngstrom, the California Highway Patrol officer, who was shot in Contra Costa County just yesterday. Our hearts go out to Officer Youngstrom and his family, and he and his family are certainly in our thoughts and prayers. When dealing with violent confrontations, our officers are trained to use whatever force is reasonable and necessary to effect an arrest or to eliminate a threat. In this specific case, when the officers were confronted by an individual who was armed with a handgun, they reacted to abate the threat. In doing so, they fired several rounds, they stopped firing, they reevaluated the threat, and then they continued firing until they perceived that the threat was no longer imminent. As chief of police, I've been specifically criticized in this particular case for being non-responsive regarding this incident. And I'll respond to that by simply saying that I was here at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning. I worked directly with our staff in coordinating the investigation of this incident. I kept our city manager and our city council apprised of the status of this case. Furthermore, I coordinated the initial press release of information regarding this case on that day. And as a reminder, every press release that is issued by our department is authorized by the Chief of Police and is sent out through the Office of the Chief of Police. Yesterday, I received a request to discuss this case again, and I was responsive to that request, and I provided that interview. I would also like to take a moment to put some of these violent incidents and these violent events in perspective. Each year in Vallejo, we receive reports on hundreds of shooting incidents. This past Labor Day weekend alone, from Friday to Sunday, over 3 days, our department received 18 calls of shooting incidents. One call involved a gang-related shooting, wherein an 18-year-old male and a 12-year-old female suffered gunshot wounds. Another suspected gang-related shooting sent a male subject in his 20s to the hospital with a gunshot wound, and another shooting took place in the parking lot of the Vallejo City Hall, wherein an individual in a vehicle was shot at several times, and although the vehicle was struck, he was fortunate to escape injury. All of these cases are currently under investigation. My point being in these cases that, as with many shooting calls our officers respond to, it only stands to reason there are going to be times when our officers are going to become engaged in lethal confrontations. It's also important to note that this year alone, our officers have taken more than 150 guns off the streets of Vallejo. Every day, we're sadly reminded by the tragic loss of Officer Jim Capu. Every day, we're hopeful that our officers will come to work, do the best job that they can in serving their community, and return home safely. And finally, let me take a moment to address the issue of replica firearms. Replica firearms are dangerous. Let me say that again. Replica firearms are dangerous. At times, it's nearly impossible to distinguish between replica firearms and real firearms, and I will illustrate that to you this morning, and I've brought both a replica firearm and a real firearm for you to make that comparison. The replica firearm that I'm going to show you here this morning is an exact copy of the replica firearm that Mr. Romero was carrying on the morning of Sunday, September 2nd. In regards to replica firearms, I've had folks ask me, well, why would individuals carry those replica firearms? And I can tell you that quite often they want to send a message to others that they are in fact armed, or that they're believed to be armed. They may be involved in criminal activity, including the sales of narcotics, or engaged in other criminal activities. And again, they want to demonstrate to other individuals that they're armed. Also, individuals who are on probation know that if they're caught with an actual firearm, they're going back to prison. Individuals who commit crimes with a firearm know that there are very serious consequences by way of criminal enhancements that might add 5 or even 10 years to a prison sentence if they're convicted in the commission of a crime by using an actual firearm. Just yesterday, another individual was contacted in Vallejo. He ran from an allied law enforcement agency who attempted to contact him, and when they were able to capture him, he was also in the possession of a replica handgun, and I have a photograph of that replica handgun that we just took off that individual just yesterday. And we've seen many such cases throughout the city of Vallejo where we've taken many other replica firearms away from individuals within our community. With that said, I'd be happy to open it up to questions I have. Before I do that, I want you to know, obviously many of our staff members are here to be able to address some of your questions and some of your issues, but at times I may call upon Captain Ken Weaver, who heads up our Operations and Investigations Division, to talk specifically about this case. I will caution you that this is an ongoing criminal investigation. We did enter into a joint protocol case with the Solano County District Attorney's Office, and we will be continuing to investigate this case for some time to come. So there may be some very specific questions that I cannot answer in regards to this case, but we will try to accommodate your questions this morning. So,
I just wanted to ask something about just a bigger picture. It seems as though there have been a lot of police-involved shootings in Vallejo this year. How many have there been? And there's some perception that there's almost like a Wild West kind of situation developing here.
Well, I can certainly understand the perception. I think the perception relates back to what I said in regards to all the gunshot type of calls that we respond to on a regular basis. There have been 7 incidents involving our officers this year. Typically each year we have a handful of incidents, maybe 4 or 5 or so incidents. So we're a couple maybe above the average for the last few years. 5 of those incidents unfortunately involved in fatalities, and I certainly understand the concern of the community, and as I mentioned, I'm concerned about every one of those cases, all 7 of those cases. But you know, when you have a case where there are literally hundreds of calls of gunshots and individuals carrying guns and individuals who seemingly are more willing to confront our officers with guns, I think that is going to be a recipe for disaster.
See, Chief?
Yes, sir.
I spoke with the family of Mario Romero, I believe, 2 days ago. They'd raised 2 questions. There's a discrepancy in what some of the witnesses say happened and what the investigation, what information has been released so far.
Sure.
In particular, in regards to whether the door of the vehicle was in fact open. Some of the witnesses there told me that the door wasn't open, and whether Mr. Romero actually pulled this weapon or manipulated the weapon
right
at the time. So I just wanted to get clarification on that.
Right. Let me
follow up on that as well.
Go ahead.
Whether the police have interviewed the sister of the victim who told me that she'd seen the incident through the window.
Okay. I will tell you that according to the statements from our officers, when they arrived on the scene and they contacted the 2 individuals in the car, both were seated in the car when they first arrived. The driver of the car, Mr. Romero, in fact opened the driver's side door, stepped out of the car. When he stepped out of the car, he had the replica handgun in his waistband. The officers asked for the 2 individuals to show their hands. The passenger of that vehicle, in fact, did show his hands, and the driver did not. In fact, the driver, Mr. Romero, reached down towards the handgun, at which time the officers engaged him with lethal force. And the second, in regards to interviewing the sister, Captain Weaver, would you respond to that?
Yes. Yeah, we haven't had an opportunity to talk to the sister yet. She's not made herself available to the detectives in this case, but we are looking forward to speaking with her.
Oh, one more time, I'm sorry. You were away from the microphone when
yes.
you started that. So
we have not spoken to the sister yet. We would like to speak to the sister, and we look forward to doing so, but she hasn't been available for our detectives yet.
Okay. And are you working closely with the Solano County District Attorney's Office on this? What types of information are you sharing? What types of how are the investigations parallel, and how are they separate to make sure that there's no conflict of interest?
The District Attorney's Office assigns 3 or 4 investigators on each officer involved shooting that we have. They run a parallel investigation with us, but they're an independent law enforcement body as well. And they make a determination at some point in time at the conclusion of their investigation.
I will tell you, before we get to the next question, in each and every one of these cases, we also run our own administrative investigation outside of the criminal investigation. Lieutenant Jesus is here today as well. He could, I'm sure, answer some questions about the administrative side, but that's also a parallel investigation that goes on, so that we run our own internal investigation to determine whether or not this particular case was within policy, within general order, within protocol. Jeffrey, question?
Chief, one of the family members says that one of the officers who was firing his weapon jumped up on the hood of the car and was shooting at fairly short range. Is that true, and is that protocol? Is that something that normally happens?
When the officers had finished firing, one of the officers did get up on the hood of the car, not to fire. In fact, they had stopped firing at that point. He did get up on the hood of the car to take a look inside the car. The officers, when they originally arrived at the scene, they were nose to nose with the car. They had illuminated the car from the front and had no way of knowing whether there were any more passengers inside the car until such time they were able to get up and take a look. And the officer chose to use that as a vantage point to get a better look inside the car. Yes, sir.
Chief, were any of the officers wearing the wearable cameras that we know Vallejo PD now has, and were there cameras in the cars as well? So,
no.
Is there any?
They were not wearing the wearable cameras. We have no video, none of our video anyway, of the particular incident. I'm not aware of any other video. I am a huge proponent and advocate of the cars having video cameras within the cars themselves, and it's something that we're discussing as we go forward, and hopefully we'll be able to do that and outfit our cars in the future, but unfortunately not in this case.
Family members who are outside, as you know, right now on the steps, said that at one point an officer stopped and reloaded. Is that true?
Well, I have no doubt that once the officers fired so many rounds that they dropped their magazine and reloaded. I'm sure that happened. We do know that there were, Ken, how many shots fired total?
31.
31 total shots that were fired. And as I mentioned earlier on, our officers are trained to stop a threat. If they believe that there's an imminent threat, they will continue firing until such time that they believe that that threat has been abated.
Can I get a little clarity on something? I talked, and I just want to make sure that we're clear. Jeff, I believe when we talked on Saturday, he said that the officers could fire down into a vehicle to prevent downfield collateral damage. But now, Chief, you're saying that there were no shots fired from that vantage point. I just want to get some clarity on that to figure out whether, in fact, getting on the hood to fire is a way of preventing collateral damage, and if that happened in this case, or now we're hearing that that didn't happen.
The officers at the scene were firing at the driver of the vehicle. You can tell that by looking at the trajectory of the windshield and the bullet strikes into that. And they took several different movements as they were firing to protect themselves, and they also minimized any damage going towards the residential area. The officer, when he was on top of the car, was clearing the car. He did not fire his handgun at that point in time. The officers are very aware of the situation behind them. We are training to make sure that we don't have a lot of collateral damage to the residents. Every time we fire a gun, we're responsible for that bullet.
Captain, how many officers fired?
2.
The family says that it has been harassed by the police since this shooting happened. They said that the police will come to their home and shine their lights on their residents at like 1:45 in the morning. Another time given was 10:37 at night. What's your response to that?
I'm not aware of any officers that made any contact with any family members. Certainly officers are in that neighborhood from time to time, but I'd say in regards to harassment, that's completely untrue. You know, and going back to the question earlier in regards to vantage points, I think it would have been difficult for anybody at any location to have made a determination as to whether that door of that car was open at the time that the officer saw the door open. Because where the car was parked and where the front of the house was located, I think it would have been very difficult to see that without leaving the house and coming outside.
Chief David Martin, OSCAT Radio. You say that there were ecstasy pills found in the vehicle?
Yeah, we recovered, I believe, about 50 ecstasy pills that were inside the car.
Were they just in the car, or did one passenger have them, or another passenger have them?
Ken, do you know where the pills were recovered?
Under the seat, I believe we have found 2 bags of pills, and I think they were underneath both seats. The driver's seat and the passenger seat.
The family says that it wants to talk to you at some point. Is that going to be facilitated, or?
Yeah, we had a request that came through the mayor's office, and the mayor and I met yesterday to discuss that. I know he'll be out of town the rest of this week, but it was my understanding the mayor's office was going to be in contact with the family, and then he and I would sit down with the family sometime next week and have a discussion with them.
Chief, going back to the larger perspective here, are you saying that there's more shots fired, more calls for shots fired? These are responding to these calls more frequently, and therefore we're seeing more engagement between officers using lethal force. In concrete terms, do more shots fired on the streets equal more?
I think in concrete terms, more shots fired on the street create an opportunity for our officers to become involved in those individuals who are firing those shots at any particular time. Just because somebody's firing shots doesn't mean that our officers at some point won't become engaged with those individuals. I think that we've been fortunate that there have been so few events in regards to the total amount of calls that we've had in regards to shootings, actual shootings with individuals who've been hit by gunfire and or shootings into houses, shootings into vehicles, or drive-by shootings where folks are just simply shooting at each other and missing. We've had numerous calls where shots have been fired into homes in our community, and where we respond to numerous calls where we've seen bullet holes in front doors and windows and other parts of a house that has been hit as a result of a shooting.
And Jeff had articulated something again on Saturday that was an important distinction, which was that officers don't wait to be fired on before firing their weapons, and that's something. Hold on. Certainly, officers aren't going to wait to determine whether this is whether it's a fake weapon or a real weapon. And if they see something that appears to be a weapon and that person appears to be acting in an aggressive manner, it's not policy to wait until they fire first or prove that it's a real weapon.
Correct. I think that if we waited for somebody to fire first, I think the officers would put themselves in such a situation that they would likely be killed.
Captain, on camera, can we get your full name?
Ken Weaver. Captain Ken Weaver.
Yes.
I don't know if there are any other questions. On the table up here, we have the replica firearm. This is a copy of the replica firearm that Mr. Romero was carrying that morning. We have the real firearm that it represents, and then I also have a photograph of the replica firearm that was taken off of an individual here in Vallejo just yesterday.
Could you speak to that directly? You were talking earlier about how you can't really tell the difference.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between these firearms. Very, very difficult, and certainly you can imagine there are a circumstance where officers confront an individual at 4:30 in the morning, in a neighborhood. It's dark, even though they're illuminated by their spotlights or their flashlights. I would say that it's virtually impossible to distinguish the difference.
Thank you. And can we talk about the criminal history of these individuals?
We know that Mr. Romero was on felony probation. We know that he was on felony probation for firearms violation and for possession of concealed firearms, and they had one prior count in regards to that. I can't speak to his motivation as to why he would carry a replica firearm, but certainly if he were caught with a real firearm, he would certainly be going back to prison, and it would be understandable that he would not want to be caught in that situation.
And Mr. Johnson, same level of charges? Was he also charged with a felony weapons charge?
I don't know the criminal. Do we know the criminal history of Mr. Johnson?
The investigators have that information, but it's not for public release right now.
It's still being developed.
It's just not fair to release that on Mr. Johnson.
Is Mr. Johnson a minor? Is he under the age of 21 or 18?
He's an adult.
He is an adult.
What is the difference in the penalty between having a replica gun and a real gun if you're on probation? You were saying you could go away for 10, it could be 10, 15 years.
5 to 10 years for an enhancement for using a firearm in a criminal activity or criminal event.
So is there anything happen when you have a pellet gun or a replica gun? I mean, is there any kind of...
There is a separate charge for having a replica firearm when you commit a crime with it. It's in the penal code. But it's nowhere near the penalty that you can get having a real firearm.
And Chief, just again back to the broader issue of the 7 shootings and the 5 fatalities. As a chief, does the frequency with which these shootings have seemed to have occurred, does it concern you? Is it cause for a larger analysis of what's going on in the department or what's going on in Vallejo?
Well, as I said earlier, every one of these events concerns me, seriously. And what we do is, first of all, is a very thorough investigation, a very thorough review in each and every one of these cases, and we look at we reflect upon the individual circumstances in every case. Certainly when we have cases where our officers were either fired upon, confronted with a weapon was pointed at, or the individual had a weapon that they refused to comply with the orders of the officers, the officers are going to take whatever reasonable force they think is necessary. So, I mean, the answer over and over is I'm concerned about every case. The fact that we had 7 cases in a year, which is a few more than than we've had on average in the last few years, yeah, that causes me concern. But it's more of a concern of the fact that we've taken 150 guns off the street, that we have hundreds of calls with shots fired, and the most concerning to me is that we seemingly have individuals that seems to be more willing to confront officers with firearms these days. Certainly this isn't unique to the city of Vallejo. We know that we've had officer-involved incidents throughout Solano County with the Solano County Sheriff's Department, the Fairfield Police Department, the Vacaville Police Department. I know the media has covered many cases recently in regards to Richmond, Oakland, most recently San Jose, and then of course we can point to the incident yesterday with the CHP officer. There's a lot of violent events and violent confrontations that are taking place with police officers. I wish they weren't, but the reality is that they are.
You say that the officers will shoot to neutralize the situation. Do you think 31 shots is excessive?
I think the amount of shots that they take are in the officer's mind in regards to the perception to abate the threat at that particular time. It'd be very difficult for me to second guess the total number of shots. If they believe that threat still exists, then they'll continue to fire as many rounds as they think is necessary.
And to be clear, the suspect appeared to be reaching for his weapon. He hadn't drawn it and pointed.
The officers indicated that the weapon was in his waistband and that he had made a movement as if he were reaching for the weapon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Get those.
Thank you. Thank you for yesterday as well. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. You spoke ahead of us. Yes, I did.